must view the impending American election exactly in the way it should be viewed, as a civilizational election, or rather, let's go beyond that, as a decision on what kind of civilization America is going to be in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, rather than another political episode that occurs or happens every 4 years. And in this video, we're going to take that idea rather seriously, and we're going to compare and contrast the two civilizational creeds offered by Kamala Harris's campaign and Donald Trump's campaign. Donald Trump's campaign going by the slogan, "Make America Great Again," and Kamala Harris has many slogans, but the one I'm going to focus on in this video today is what can be unburdened by what has been.
Imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been, you know?
What can be unburdened by what has been.
Which pathway is healthier for American civilization? Which pathway strengthens the foundations of our republic? And which pathway will allow us to navigate a hostile world, an increasingly hostile world, in which America's status is often vilified and defiled by those who hate us, internally and foreign. But before we get into all that, my friends, I hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I would encourage you, please, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get this message out there, even if you disagree with me. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the video. So, let's take this idea of this being a civilizational election seriously. Before we get into more of the nitty-gritty analysis, let's actually talk about what I mean here. Very few periods in our country have there been turning points, have there been times in our history that could decide how the next few decades go. The Great Depression was one of those turning points. The Civil Rights Movement of the 60s was one of those turning points. The Cold War as a decade in the 80s, of course, I know what happened before then, but the 80s particularly, that section of the Cold War is especially one of those turning points. 9/11 was especially one of those turning points. And there have been so many different turning points. COVID was perhaps the last turning point that really decided what the tone and mood of the country was going to be. And I think ultimately we made an okay decision because many people became more skeptical of what authority was telling them, as opposed to simply bowing down upon the altar of status and sacrificing their thrift, their resilience, and their family's independence for whatever the technocrats at the CDC would say. But this election is another turning point, I would argue, because this election, it happens in the context of events that are deathly important to the survival of our country, whether that be the migration crisis, which has caused egalitarian progressives in New York City and Chicago and so many other places to have to realize the limits of progress and the limits of their ideas when it came to accepting all of these migrants, which ultimately displaced their own citizens and caused furor within the polity, whether it be, of course, what is going on right now within various institutions in America, various social institutions, like the erosion of sports at the behest of this kind of benevolence that displaces women who are within those sports, whether it be the powder keg of a situation that is happening right now in the Middle East, that America, I think, is playing a big role in not actually mediating, but instead fanning the flames, whether it, of course, I can name 10,000 different things for you. This is a turning point election. But domestically is where we have to focus for this video. Because there are two domineering visions, not just two, but primarily two domineering visions represented in this election, represented as the antidote to so many of the issues I've talked about today. Let's first address Make America Great Again, or MAGA, because many people believe that MAGA is simply an empty slogan that evokes emotion in people and doesn't actually mean anything beyond an electoral strategy. I always say there are electoral problems and there are civilizational problems. And unfortunately, American politics is so demented that electoral problems have became civilizational problems, when electoral problems obviously shouldn't be that serious. So let me give you an example. An electoral problem is your local city councilor has been embezzling funds to a special interest group that manages the city's landscaping and he needs to be replaced. That's an electoral problem. A civilizational problem is when the people at the very top of your government have a different conception of society than what was originally conceived in the founding generation, i.e. the progressives, and they are willing to then use force to further their project in society along the way, and they castigate and alienate all of those who do not go along with them. That's a civilizational problem because that goes to the very core and ethos of what your civilization actually is. So in that context, what does MAGA mean? Make America Great Again. MAGA is an imperative. It is a call to action. It is an acknowledgement of the condition of the country in both the future and the past. It is a statement of values. It is several different things tied into one single phrase. And when a political slogan can capture all of these different meanings and you tie it into one single phrase, it's actually quite powerful. Because the person that takes MAGA seriously will assume a few things. It will assume, number one, that America is not good right now, even though it was at some point in time. It will assume that there was something that made America great in the past, and we ought to rediscover and find what did that particular thing, which then increases the chance of introspection, which then increases the chance of you using your rational faculties as a human being to find the truth, which then encourages the citizen to become more connected with their community and more connected with their history and more connected with their country. It presupposes this notion that there are problems facing us, but we can overcome them. So at the same time, while it is an acknowledgement of a destitution, it's also an acknowledgement of a tenacity to overcome the problems that you're facing right now. It is several things mixed into one. It is an acknowledgement of things, of values that have a place in making America a great civilization. It is an acknowledgement of America's fundamental uniqueness. That's what Make America Great Again means in so many different words. But then you go over to Kamala Harris. And while she is not elected to have an official slogan for her campaign, she says many things. She says that there is a great significance in the passage of time. She says many things that many people scratch their heads at. Now, I recently made a video about what can be unburdened by what has been. And it's done very well, has almost 400,000 views. Thank goodness, I am very happy. And many of you may actually be here from that video. And so I've gone in depth on what that phrase actually means. But I'm going to take a little bit of time not to go as in depth as I was in that video. If you want to see my more in-depth explanation, I would encourage you to look at that video. It'll be in the comment section down below. I want to take this time to actually explain some new things that have popped up since I've made that video, because there have been different commentators like James Lindsay taking on that phrase and trying to take it in so many different directions. What can be unburdened by what has been in plain language simply means we are going to impose our ideology upon the present. In doing so, reject the past and then move the future in the direction that we want to move it. Now, this is not, as some people were saying, witchcraft or mysticism or the occult. In fact, when I hear that, I kind of chuckle because as someone who himself, I'm personally, I keep my faith private, but I'm a Christian, but as someone himself who actually studies witchcraft and the occult because I'm curious, this is not that at all. In fact, a lot of those traditions would probably have trouble with what Harris is saying because a lot of witchcraft traditions actually put very great value in the past, in the old ways, I guess. So that's a different topic, a different day. What this is it is a rather mundane but sinister phrase that is germane to the progressive tradition that has unfortunately been mismanaging our country for the past 130 plus years. And I've gone through great lengths about this tradition on this channel because it is the core foe to American greatness at our current point in time. The progressives have taken over the educational institutions, they have taken over the political institutions, and they have fundamentally framed our current political debate around terms that enable them to pursue their agenda while disenabling and alienating those of us who want to have a rational conversation. So what can be unburdened by what has been is not just a rejection of the past. In other words, a rejection of wisdom. If you want to have wisdom, you must be willing to entertain those that have come before you, it's also a rejection, fundamentally, of rational politics. It's a rejection of using your ability to understand concepts, not for what they seem to be, not for what they make you feel, but for what they actually are, and then analyzing those in a good framework. It actually rejects all of that because it's an evocative statement. What can be, unburdened by what has been? Well, that then triggers your imagination. And your imagination has the ability oftentimes to lead you away from virtue. Your imagination most certainly has the ability to suspend your ability to think well. Your imagination as a thing has taken men away from their families, has taken nations into war. You know, this entire idea of Pax Americana, this entire idea of America being the arsenal of democracy, that was imagination put into the form of policy and then impressed upon other civilizations, and ultimately what happened? It ended up in the destitution of the American people by eroding trust in our government and by shifting obligation from the homeland to foreign lands, which then enabled bodies like the United Nations and NATO and other internationalist groups that have used America in a destructive way, and in a way that fundamentally erodes our sovereignty, and it also has embodied those who would seek to go to war as opposed to pursuing peace. It was the imagination that was the precursor to these failed events. So what can be unburdened by what has been embodies, I think, the folly of the imagination. The progressive political project is fundamentally built upon the imagination. Think about it. Everyone should have universal health care. Well, what does that actually mean in real terms? That means you have to appropriate resources from one group of people to another group of people. That means you have to actually go in and mandate people do certain things in order to ensure your scheme works. That means you have to be able to have almost an unlimited amount of resources to apply to everybody. And even if you can apply them to most people, millions will still not have those resources. Or if they do have them, they will not have them at the level of others. You see what I'm saying? What does that actually mean? But it's the imagination that justifies these failed premises. The idea, for example, of common sense gun reform. It's the imagination that says we can disarm law-abiding people and then simultaneously make our communities safe. But reality says that if you disarm law-abiding people, you'll endanger the community, you'll endanger the nation, because a morally assertive citizenship, a morally assertive citizenry must be an armed citizenry, or else there is no corrective to abuses of authority. But the imagination says, forget about all that. The imagination suspends basic considerations in pursuit of a broader agenda. In this case, the progressive notion of change. That, my friends, is the danger here. Do you want to go back to a solid foundation of first principles, MAGA, Make America Great Again, that roots you in a context, a historical context, a moral context, a philosophical context that is unimpeachable and has over 270 plus years of literature and justification going all the way back to the Constitutional Convention surrounding it? Or do you want to go back to the 20th century, the 1900s, Woodrow Wilson, Herbert Crowley, Walter Lippmann, all these people, and embrace their fundamentally managerial vision of the American society, their top-down vision of the American society, where the democratic interest matters more than the Constitution, where our traditions, if they stand in the way of progress, are discarded, where the government is seen as a fixer of things as opposed to a necessary problem that we must have to prevent other problems. Do you want to go back to that tradition, which Kamala Harris so dutifully represents and so articulately says with her what can be unburdened by what has been? It's such a clear contrast. This is not about Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. This is fundamentally about what kind of civilization do we as Americans want to have. This Gen Z 24-year-old wants to have an America that allowed me to get to this point where the kid of a single mother, me, can be in front of this camera talking to you, making a career out of making people think, as opposed to being doomed to the circumstances that 200 years ago I would have been doomed to under any other system that was not the American system. My life is an ode to the virtue of the American system. I want to keep that. I don't want that to go away. But the progressives have been eroding the potentials of people by helping them in the most destructive ways. I know what I choose. I don't want to have what can be. I want to have what was, what is tested, what we know is good, what is based on first principles and morality and confirmed by reason. And I want to ensure we can apply those same things to the future. That is my choice. What is yours, my friends? My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can to get this message out there. Study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.